You said great art leaders are defined by the organizations they shape. And then you went on to say there are 6 components of being a great leader. And I thought it was incredibly challenging as I wrote those things down. And at the beginning of this conversation, I suggested to people make sure you have a pen and paper ready. And this is one of the reasons why, because I found that these not only were encouraging for me, but they're also challenging. And do you mind if I break down these thoughts you have one at a time?
Not at all. And let me just put in a plug that there is a podcast called The Search for Arts Leadership, a 9-part podcast that I put together last summer that I would, you know, ask your listeners to check with if it's on Audible and Spotify, et cetera. But yeah, let's dig into this. Yeah,
Mhm.
sure.
Absolutely. Yes, I actually got a chance to listen to the search on Audible in my preparation for our conversation.
Oh, good.
And I do recommend it. It's easy to find. Just go to Audible if you have an Audible account and you type in your name or the search, and it comes right up. And
Search for Arts Leadership, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the first one of your 6 components you talk about that a leader needs to have within themselves is the sustainability. And what organizations do you champion for this sustainability? Obviously, it comes from the top down. It really comes from the leadership. But sustainability, how important do you see that in the movement of a leader and his nonprofit?
Well, first of all, it is fundamental. It is the underpinning, because what we mean by this is that the institution has the capacity to continue, right? And we all know that some nonprofit institutions fail, go out of business, or are so poor that they can't make the investments that they can make. So
Yeah.
if we think
For the
about
one
what are
generation.
right, if we think about what are great institutions, one component must be that they are sustainable, that they have enough funding, financial, et cetera. So that's the fundamental. It's what Bowen and Bowman wrote about in 1967. It's what graduate schools in nonprofit management have been obsessed with. How do we have an endowment? How do we have a positive cash flow? Things like that. But a rich organization is not necessarily a great organization. And that's my point. My point is that there are 5 other components that are required to define. I often ask my graduate students, what makes a great organization? What makes a great arts organization? What makes a great nonprofit? Ponder it. And let's pursue it. So the first one is sustainability. Done. But sustainability alone, rich alone, doesn't cut it.
Absolutely. Number 2 of the 6 components of being a great leader you mentioned is ethics. And in this day and this age, even the definition of ethics is being challenged. How do you define ethics and what symptoms of it you seek in the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, well, there are, of course, the personal ethics, right? There are the being true to yourself, to your community. I believe that nonprofit organizations are liberal organizations in that they believe in the general good, right? They believe in the general good, that they are disinterested. They're not only interested in themselves, but outside of themselves. And leaders are challenged every day. They're challenged with DEI, being fair to employees. They're challenged with the difference between having power and distributing that power. And of course, there are so many other things. I mean, we expect our nonprofits to be truthful to us. Think about that, right? We expect that. We don't
Right.
expect that from, I don't know, Hershey's. We don't expect that. But we expect that the Red Cross, which has had many, many ethical challenges, is going to be using our donations fairly and ethically and equitably and not enriching themselves. We know that over the years that has been the case. So that's ethics broadly written, right?
I was having a conversation earlier this week with our podcast with Stephen Baudouin of the Washington Chorus. And I was talking to him about specifically this issue. And I kept noticing something he was doing through the entire 45-minute conversation. Is he kept on, I say, so what you're doing on social media is incredible. And he'd say, Trevor is an amazing employee. And he kept on building up his team around him and not taking on false credit for even what was obviously just something done well with the Washington Chorus. And by the end of the interview, I said, are there anybody on your staff you haven't mentioned yet? He starts laughing. He goes, hold on, I'm in trouble now. I've got to think this through. And a great example of one of these leaders that we're talking about here. The third component of being a great leader is accessibility. And the arts world is led by those with a melancholy personality, brilliant creative leaders, but closed off in their public face. How does an introverted leader overcome this in accessibility?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, and these six are always in interplay with each other, right? So if you have, let's talk about the arts. If you have a very popular offering, the sustainability part of you would be to say, let's raise our ticket prices. Let's maximize our income. That's just good business. But what happens when we raise our ticket prices? We exclude a certain segment of the population. Also, arts institutions, even many nonprofit institutions, are institutions, and they tend to alienate both by their physical presence, by the messaging, by their cost structure, by the composition of their boards, like rich white people, tend to be exclusionary. And so the idea that to be accessible is to be accessible, to bring people in, and to demonstrate an accessibility, a generosity outside into the world.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
The fourth component of being a great leader, you say, is relevance. What are the keys of being able to maintain relevance as a leader and influence in 2022?
Yeah. So you need to understand the world around you, right? You need to be flexible. You need to, and I'm not suggesting that we change our mission. I'm suggesting that our purpose is clear, but the way in which we enact that purpose must be flexible. We need to, for example, maybe a bit controversial, if we have an endowment, which is an endowment for the future,
Yeah.
but we are seeing our community suffering, maybe we need to take some of that endowment and use it today, not in the future. It's about messaging. It's about understanding what the issues are. If an arts institution, for example, only is located in a northern industrial city, Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, right? And their offering is only of 19th century Italian composers. They are not being relevant to their community,
That's
right?
right. Mhm.
That idea of programming being relevant to your community.
Wow, this is good. Number five, the fifth component of being a great leader is creativity. And the fear of many leaders in the arts when they hit their 40s and 50s is not only burnout, but also just not keeping up with the trends. We become chasers of the creative mindset. And instead of being creative ourselves, we're just trying to copy the cutting edge in creativity. How do we get back to our roots and reignite the creativity in ourselves as a leader?
Well, in ourselves, challenging. And I think that the way we separate the great ones from the ordinary ones is it's that they who are creative, it's almost self-referential. They are always seeking something new. One of the paradigms, the difference between a leader and a manager is that a manager seeks order. A leader, in some ways, seeks chaos. A leader
Mhm.
seeks a different way of doing things, a challenge of the ordinary. That difference. Now, of course, you need a manager to hold you down, manage the books, but the institutions, the leaders who exhibit this kind of creativity, who also exhibit the kind of reaching out to creative people to engage them. That means giving them the birth, giving them the freedom to operate within your organization, right? As a kind of a emotional intelligence, I think.
For about 3.5 years, I got a chance to run alongside of a business called Oxford HIM. And one of the things I always used to say is don't be afraid of chaos because there's always growth in chaos. And just what you were saying just now, with a nonprofit, when something is going wrong in the community around us, it allows us to stand up. And in that standing up in that chaos, become more noticed. And when somebody's being noticed, that's when the support also can come. So in this day and age where there's been so much chaos in the last 2 years, there is for the entrepreneurially minded nonprofit leader the ability to step up into something brand new where many other years where things are quiet and mundane, we don't get those opportunities.
I would agree with you. It's very well put. Very well put.
The sixth component of being a great leader, our final one, you talk about being humanity. It's the nature and foundation of nonprofit mission to love and to love humanity. What tries to steal this away from us as organizations and leaders?
Well, let me just step back for one moment and say that as we have talked about this, we've had S for sustainability, ethics, E rather, A for access, R for relevance, C for creativity. And as I was putting together this podcast, my sense is that the great leaders, of course, they want to be accessible and ethical and sustainable, but their purpose, their goal, their raison d'etre is to change the world,
Mm,
is to think about their institution as an agent of change or changing how people think about the world.
that's
And
beautiful.
so, as I thought about this, and as I was looking for an acronym, and as for almost 40 years I have been a search consultant, I realized that the H is really humanity. It's really about thinking about humanity, thinking about changing people's minds, how they think about the world, how they think about each other, how they think about themselves. There's nothing more powerful, nothing more life changing than going to a play, right? You can read a thesis about the history of America, but if you go to see Hamilton, your life, your view of our history, of American history, has been changed, right? And so we see this in poetry, we see this in novels, we see this in looking at a painting. It changes how we think about the world. And it is the arts leader in this case who is the conduit between the artist and the public. And this idea, this initiative, this driving force is this, what I call humanity, is change the world. And God knows we need lots of changing.
Yes.
That's
No, we
it.
do.
SEARCH, the six
Beautiful.
components. Six
You know,
components.
um, I have. You're familiar with Zig Ziglar
Yep.
and the work he did over many years. His his publication company is the one that got a hold of my first manuscript for demystifying fundraising funnels, and they grabbed it and they've ran with it and done a great job getting that book ready for the market. And they're already starting to tell me, all right, you need to start gathering material for your next book. This is dynamic and giving you complete credit for it. Do you mind if I use search in that next book as one of the things I speak about?
Well, in that I am writing the book, Search for Arts Leadership.
Oh, wow. Okay.
On the
You
other
mean I got to
hand,
buy your book now? That's what it means.
I think that this paradigm, you can't copyright a paradigm.
No.
And I welcome you to pursue it, explore it. It's the kind of thing that I talk about with my graduate students around the world. It's the way when a board says to me, well, what makes a great leader? I have an answer, right? I have a and when I evaluate a potential leader, these are the things I look at, in addition to emotional intelligence and things like that.